Greetings everybody, and welcome to G4G here on YouTube. Today we're going to have the first episode of G4G News. So my latest video, I happened to mention that I wanted to start doing segments on the channel that were not particularly pertaining to an individual game, like here is this update here is this new character here is this big patch over here, but something outside of a specific game that pertains to the world of gaming. So recently I've done a video on This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, with the fact that Amazing Eternals by developers Digital Extremes is going to get shut down and isn't even going to make it into production. And that also Runic Games, who do Torchlight and Hob and Motiga with Perfect World Entertainment, is now putting Gigantic in jeopardy because Perfect World is shutting down Motiga, although a maintenance staff is staying behind. So I guess you could call that one news, but this one's a little bit more on the fringes of it. So before we get into it, I want to ask you guys a question to process in your brain and kind of think about before you get into the chunk of the video. At least here in the United States, I don't exactly know how the law works in other countries when pertaining to this, but here in the States, if you become in an altered mind state due to drugs or alcohol, you are considered legally responsible for your actions, no matter what they are. So if you're at a bar, you have 3 beers in 45 minutes, and you blow something over the legal limit, and you've had an accident, you've hit somebody, you've killed somebody, you've wrapped your car around the telephone pole, you are legally responsible for those actions. You don't get in front of a judge and say, well, I'm a pretty big guy, I had 4 beers, I felt fine, didn't feel tipsy at all, but that telephone pole just came out of nowhere. And the judge doesn't go, oh, well, clearly then, since you said you felt fine, you were not at fault, case dismissed. That doesn't happen here in the United States. Anytime you are in those mind states, and obviously the easiest example for that is drinking, you are completely responsible for your actions. So if you've been drinking at a bar and somebody says that your wife looks ugly and you punch them in the face, you are absolutely responsible for assault. Even if you've been drinking and that guy called your wife Piggly McWiggly. The same thing happens if you get in a car. Yet, when it comes to matters of sexual conduct, all of a sudden, you are not responsible for your actions because you were inebriated. You were drunk. Have you noticed that winds up being the case here in the States? So that if you're at a bar, you've had the same 4 drinks in about an hour and 15 minutes, and you start feeling a little tipsy or something like that, and you leave that situation and you are with another person who begins to make a pass at you, and then you engage in sexual activity. All of a sudden, if there was a problem with that sexual activity, you are now a victim, and the other person is an aggressor, an assaulter of some kind, and is held responsible. So if you flip that back to, say, the drunk driving example, that would be like having the 4 beers in 45 minutes, going out and driving home, there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk, you hit them because you were distracted because you were too slow changing a radio station, and then you wind up saying, well, I was drinking, so my reactions were a little bit slower. Blame the pedestrian. He was crossing the street, and my car was coming. And it's like, oh, well, shit. Obviously, we need to blame the pedestrian for crossing the road when your car was barreling through it at 80 miles an hour. Case dismissed. Isn't that a little weird piece of dichotomy that we have, at least here in the States, and I'm sure other countries have very, very similar rules as we do. So, while thinking about that and kind of processing that example, I present to you this week's news. So earlier in the week, a streamer by the name of Desiree Luna, or known as Kristlyn, on Twitter, made an accusation against an Overwatch manager, San Francisco Shock Overwatch team manager, part of Energy Esports, saying that Max Bateman had sexually assaulted her back in September. And here is the ensuing story. So, woman said that earlier in the week, Max Bateman, former manager of San Francisco Shock of the upcoming Overwatch League, sexually assaulted her in September after giving her a drink that made her feel dizzy and confused, and later she was going in and out of consciousness. So that's the basic story here. So to kind of sum up the entire situation as it had occurred that day, is that she and Max had been out at a party. At the party, she'd been drinking, and at some point it is believed that Max was the one who made her very last drink that she had at the table. So perhaps bottle service is involved here. He was supposedly the last one who made the drink. She started to feel not good and said to him, I'm not really feeling good, let's get out of here. And he's like, okay, let's take an Uber. They take an Uber back to his place because that's where some of her stuff was prior to going out that night, including her keys. She lays down on the couch. She's out on the couch for a little while he is playing a game on his PC. She wakes up, pukes, coughs up a little bit of blood and some saliva, goes into his room, tells him. He comes out, cleans up the puke, and she's now laying in his bed. He goes back to playing games on his PC for a while, and then eventually winds up jumping into bed with her and putting the moves on her in some way, shape, or form, and then something happens. She wakes up the next day, kind of hazy, not exactly sure what's going on. She gets her keys, he drives her home, and then several days after the event, she begins to have some more clarity about what happened that night as her memories come back to her, and then she files the complaint that she was sexually assaulted. So let's take a look at her twit longer, which is what we have over here. She said that they had been best friends, very, very close friends. They had gone to conventions and stuff before, and they had shared hotel rooms, and never any boundaries were crossed. On September 30th, Max and I were out at a beach club drinking with some Energy Overwatch players. I had a small amount of drinks, normal amount of drinks, started to feel sick. The last one I had was made by Max. I felt dizzy, confused, started to dry heave. We got Ubered back to his place. I remember falling asleep on his couch and waking up and coughing up blood. I went to lay in his room. He was there playing games on his PC, cleaned up the couch. He came back to the room, played games for a couple more hours. At this point, I was in and out of consciousness. I remember Max laying next to me, but I didn't think anything of it because we'd shared a bed in the past and nothing's happened. That's when he sexually assaulted me. In my mind, I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, couldn't say anything. In the morning, he dropped me off at home. After a few days, I started remembering more of what happened, and I confronted him through text messages and told him what happened wasn't okay, that we were friends, nothing more. He admits what he did wasn't right, and I never gave him permission to do any of this in any way. I filed a police report, but was told there wasn't enough proof. Max was called in to give a statement, but he was a no-show and texted me if we could solve this between us, and she's saying sexual assault is really serious. So, here are the texts in question over here, and this kind of lays the basis of everything. As you can see here in these text messages, by the time and the battery indicator, they bounce around all over the place. There's 1250, 652, 106. Battery changes quite a lot, and things are selectively cropped, so it is kind of hard to fully know all of the conversation because things are cropped out. So there's a lot of lead-in that we don't see, especially on the first one. So it starts off with her saying, setting the preference for the hotel. He says one bed so we can cuddle. And then she's going, you need to stop this. I thought I could trust you. I'm not okay with the other night, so stop the jokes. And it's like, okay, preferences are fine. And she goes on again, don't ever joke about us. We're friends. I never want to hear another word about this. If you lay a hand on me, I won't let it go. I'll take things into my own hands and get others involved. It wasn't okay. And he goes, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were more sober since with the amount you were waking up and talking. Then she says, sorry isn't enough. Then in the middle column, he's saying, I'm sorry for what happened. I want to rebuild your trust. I'll never push the subject again. And she says, do you realize what you did wasn't okay? Yes, I did realize what was wrong. And she goes, that's it. And then finally, as we get a little further in over here, sorry doesn't cut it here. It's more than that to me. Are you really sorry? Show me how sorry you are. Post on Twitter what you did to me. If you're so much my best friend, tell people what kind of person you are. And, you know, let everybody know. And then at one point he says, like, are we still going hiking? She's like, no. And everybody pointed to that one and was, like, laughing at him. There is a style of looking at this that says to you, well, yeah, he knows he did something wrong, he's admitting it, and he's trying to make up for it. But there is also another style of looking at this, and this is one that I've particularly lived through. His communication style and her communication style, he is striking me as somebody who, at least prior to this event, was a nice guy, was close to this girl, and is probably used to dealing with some crazy emotions from Kristen. These kind of turn of the dime, 180s in mentality and emotions and feelings. I've had this with an ex-girlfriend of mine where she was a rageaholic and she could absolutely change moods at the drop of a hat and go into an absolute emotional version of the Hulk and go crazy. And they could take something that had previously been black and spin it around and just change it as all of a sudden it's white. And you are ridiculously on the defensive sitting in front of this volcano of anger and completely changed emotions. The way that he's communicating with her, to me, strikes me as somebody who is used to that with her and is kind of doing the verbal or text equivalent of backing away slowly with their hands up and going, okay, all right, something's up here. It's not necessarily that he's admitting that he did something wrong. It's that he is placating her for going on the offensive and saying, you know, what you did was wrong and all this other stuff. And he's like, oh, okay, all right, it's wrong, got it, cool. And not, at least in what we see cropped over here, isn't actually admitting to something, but rather defending himself because all of a sudden he's dealing with a volcano that's blowing up and potentially changed moods all of a sudden. Now you might think, well, that sounds incredibly sexist. He raped her in some way, shape, or form. More on that to come, because that might not necessarily be the case over here. So over on Max Twitter, he says that he'll be posting a statement, and then he does. And he posts the statement in his twit longer, saying that now that I've arrived back home from BlizzCon, I've consulted with my attorney. These are false allegations. I would like to make a short statement, but this is also going through a legal process. I communicated with Chrislyn that the detective called me, so I wanted to talk to her and see if we could settle it between us before I went to the police. I did, in fact, go and meet with the detective and give him my testimony, so now her comment that he was a no-show winds up not being true. The detective read all my text messages from the day of the beach club and a few days after, where we went to a hookah lounge together, 2 escape rooms with the Energy roster, Top Golf. I showed him a picture of us after the escape room. I was let go and have yet to hear from the detective, despite me trying to contact him multiple times. In addition, you could see Crystal was talking about us sharing a hotel room at the start of the text message 4 days after the assault. For TwitchCon later in the month, she requested that we still stay in the same room after this alleged assault. I will not be answering questions as recommended by my counsel. So he's refuting what she said, and then there is a very key thing down here in his Twitter responses. And this is from a mutual friend of both people, somebody who knows Hoderas and Chrislyn. My first encounter after meeting Max was through Chrislyn. From knowing her since high school, she's always had a thing for the esports community. It was her biggest goal to accomplish. She told me she had met Max on Tinder and communicated how he was very known in the esports community. Within a few weeks, they started dating. Her dating life was very open on her Discord and Twitter, but she would tell a few of us in private when Max wasn't present that they would casually have sex, and it was being exploited on her own Discord because sex with Max was awful, and she talks about other guys in the community that she wouldn't mind getting some from, including somebody by the name of Tyler1. After a few Twitch parties, Crystalline ended the relationship because Max still had feelings for her, so they remained friends. The friendship they had was probably one of the greatest friendships I'd seen in a while, but after a few dinners and trips, I got to notice how manipulative Kristen was. My point of view is that she makes him pay for everything. She orders the most expensive shit and tells Max to pay for it, since he planned the dinner, which was not true in many of the cases. It's just ridiculous. Second note to that, I remember the time when we went to the hookah lounge called Luna on the Strip for her friend's birthday. Max got invited, but Chrislyn kept telling me to make room for her next to me so she didn't have to sit near Max, but she was the one who invited him. Made no sense to me, but I did as I asked. Little did I know that she had intentions to fuck the hookah server, who she's been trying to get at since an hour before Max arrived. I talked about my visions with a couple people. It turns out that I was right. They said that at the club that they were at, the Encore Beach Club, they have employees pat down looking for drugs. They have canines walk the line every 20 minutes. There's no way somebody could have gotten caught bringing drugs into the Encore Beach Club, and that other clubs have way less security. That could have happened anywhere else, but not at this club. And not to mention, she was pre-gaming at the gaming house prior to the Encore Beach Club. She even sent me Snapchats of everyone taking shots. Could that have contributed to her being drunker than normal and potentially blacking out? So when you read this outside perspective of somebody who knows both of them, and when this guy put this on his twit longer, Chrislyn said, hey, can you please take that down? However, somebody had screenshotted it and kept it before the tweet was actually deleted. So now this seems to be the case over here, is that she's claiming she was assaulted by him, and he's claiming this is false and it didn't happen that way. To me, it seems the case that this has gotten very, very gray and very, very muddy in the middle of it. What are the chances that he actually spiked the drink? It does sound reasonable that potentially he did, but then again, you do have those nights where things hit you harder than they normally do, especially considering on what you drank, the mood that you were in, if you were stressed out, if you were emotional. I partied at a friend of mine's one weekend when it was a tequila night and I was just fine. Went back the next weekend, had a pony keg of Killian's, and I puked more times in that night than I think I had in like a decade combined. Turned out it was a skunky keg of Killian's. Now, it didn't sound like they were having beer. It sounded like they had mixed drinks of some sort, but things do happen, and it's not necessarily because he spiked the drink. Here's evidence to that. If he spiked the drink, then why did it take him hours to do something? By her own admission, she had said that she goes and passes out on the couch. She'd been gaming, basically ignoring her. She gets up, she pukes, she goes into his room and tells him about it. He cleans it up. She passes out on the bed. He goes back to gaming again. Like, what? If he spiked her drink to get at her, he seems to be playing a very long game over here. I mean, in relation to her, not what he was doing on his PC. So it seems like he's absolutely taking his time in doing something over here. Maybe because he didn't spike the drink, so he was not attempting to take advantage of a very passed out chick in his bed. Secondly, as this establishes over here, the two of them had a relationship in the past that included sex. If you've ever been in one of those relationships that ends, but you're still fuck buddies for a little while or friends with benefits, sometimes the line gets incredibly blurred because one day you aren't dating anymore and you're not supposed to have feelings for each other, but you're still having sex, and then the next day maybe you wind up running into rejection. And this is male or female. This isn't anything. This is either sex that has had this kind of experience where all of a sudden it's like, no, you know, or a more aggressive denial of it, and you're like, okay, then what the hell was happening yesterday? I guess things have changed. Because of that blurred line between these two, we don't know how far back they were dating and hooking up. None of that is established here. Potentially what may have happened here is that he put the moves on her. She didn't deny them, so he continued. Now that if she is about as drunk as she says she was and was paralyzed and everything like that, then it winds up definitely being a sexual assault situation. The other side of that is that potentially he goes into bed to attempt to sleep because he's done partying and drinking and playing whatever he was on his PC, and maybe she winds up making a move on him, or it starts very innocently enough and it's reciprocated, and then the next morning she's like, oh my god, this happened. Oh great, that's not good. He's probably going to wind up thinking we're back together or something, or making a bigger deal of this. God, I don't know why I did that. Just hadn't had any while and was horny. The guy I was chasing wasn't after me, so like, we don't really know. Only two people know what occurred there. And we certainly have not really heard his side of what went down during the sexual act. We've only heard hers, where she was saying, I felt something was happening, but I was kind of paralyzed and couldn't say anything. Which you would think it would begin if she was drugged, and this is now several hours after the fact, you would think that it would begin to wear off a little bit, that she most likely would be screwed up around the time when she was on the couch, rather than several hours later when she was in the bed on the timeline. But so that's what we have here, folks. We now have, in the light of all of the sexual misconduct that is occurring in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, and now accusations against Brett Ratner, and accusations against Charlie Sheen that might have been related to Corey Haim, who had passed away. Now we have sexual misconduct going on in the world of esports. Very, very interesting case and scenario with this one, and it is certainly one that I would like to see how it plays out, because this one has gotten very, very gray over here, and there are two very strong camps on either side. One camp is definitely like, dude, you're guilty, you admitted it, you are a rapist, blah, blah, blah. And then there is the other camp that even on her own Twitter happens to mention, too bad some women want to jump on this boat so badly, who knows what the reasons are. They decide to make false allegations. If you fake this, you should be ashamed considering how many women actually go through this. Did she make a false accusation or not? Truth is, by going public with it, she has definitely invited an unsavory element into her life, regardless of whether she is faking this or not. If she is a Twitch streamer, we all know how toxic Twitch can get in chat at times, and I certainly think it would be very hard to be streaming right now while these accusations are out there flying around. My guess is that she's going to have a lot of people in her channel that are either very supportive of her or attacking her, calling her a slut, and doing all the typical things that asshole men would do. And you just have to go back to Gamergate to see that one. If it winds up that she did make a false accusation, or she did initiate the sexual contact with him or something like that, then she basically is just going to find it, I think, very hard to have a Twitch stream at all, because of the fact that she's just going to get destroyed by that chat. She's just going to have to like play and not even look at chat, really. And her moderators, if she has any, are going to need to do a lot of work. There is that thought that perhaps this was done to gain attention because of his higher profile there when it comes to esports, being a manager of the San Francisco Shock. And she was a Twitch streamer that I don't know how many people have actually heard of or aware of. And now her name is way out there. Because this has been picked up by esports related websites. It's been picked up by Kotaku. I mean, this one has gained some momentum in terms of being out there in the press. For him, thanks to the zero tolerance policy, he has been fired. He was fired after the accusation was levied before it was investigated. So his job is now gone. He is, whether he is found innocent or not, he's lost a job and is completely shot. And now this is in that community. So if he attempts to get a similar job with a similar organization, he's going to suffer the stigma of this. I mean, this could go the way of the Duke lacrosse team from, what, a decade ago or so, where it looked really bad at first and then was like, well, no, and then exactly go down the way that it was mentioned. So this is going to be a very interesting story as it develops. It's probably one of the most high-profile things that we are seeing in gaming of this nature, especially considering there's that NeoGAF accusation. I feel bad for all parties involved in this, as both people are definitely going to suffer some negative outcomes from this, no matter how it is determined legally, or if he does finally say, okay, you know, this is not going to court, here's my official statement, this is what happened, she did this, she did that. It's going to be a matter of he said, she said, no matter what, unless somebody was there and saw exactly what happened. So, what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. You are welcome to check out all the proof yourself on his Twitter, which is at Hoderas, her Twitter, which is at Kristlin, and then you have Kotaku that you could read and go down in the comments over there. And there are several other sites that have picked up the story. So let me know what you guys think. See you, everybody.